I never imagined that at 70 years old I would sit across a polished mahogany desk signing a rent increase notice for the apartment my ex-husband shared with his new wife. The manager hesitated when I slid the paper forward. "Are you sure you want to double it, Mrs. Foster?" I smiled that quiet, deliberate smile people mistake for frailty. "Yes, and make sure they know the new owner wants the payment on time." My name, printed in crisp black ink, stared back at me. Eleanor Foster, property owner, the same name my husband once erased from every business account we shared. When the envelope was sealed and handed to the courier, I didn't feel triumph. I felt balance. That's what numbers do when you let them settle long enough they balance. He used to say, "You don't understand the world anymore, Ellie. Men my age are meant to move forward, not drag dead weight." He said it while packing his suitcase while I sat in the armchair we bought together 35 years ago, the one that still smelled faintly of his cologne. He didn't look back when he closed the door. A month later, his wedding photos with a woman half his age appeared online. My friends called to ask if I was all right. I told them the truth. I wasn't angry. I was curious. Curious how long it would take for him to realize that youth fades faster than integrity. Do you know what it feels like to be told you've expired? To have someone you built an entire life with decide you're too old, too slow, too invisible, he said. "You've had your time, Ellie. I need someone who makes me feel alive." And yet, as I signed that document this morning, watching his name listed under tenant, I realized I'd never been more alive than in that moment. I'm not telling you this for pity. I'm telling you because no one warns women that invisibility is a lie we're taught to believe. The truth is, silence isn't weakness. It's a weapon. The day Alan left, I didn't cry. I made Tiev open my laptop and logged into the investment account he'd forgotten I managed. It wasn't spite. It was habit. I'd always been the one who kept the books balanced. Years of working as an accountant trained me to see patterns. And what I saw that night was an imbalance waiting to correct itself. Still, betrayal leaves a smell in the air. You know it's there even when everything looks clean. I remember the sound of his car pulling out of the driveway, the faint echo of tires on wet pavement, and the way my hands trembled as I folded his last tax return. I had signed it E. Foster. He had never noticed that my initials matched those of the company that owned half his assets. When you've lived 70 years, you learn that revenge isn't loud. It's patient. It sits quietly like interest accumulating in an account someone forgot existed. That night, I made a promise to myself not to him. I wouldn't chase him. I wouldn't beg for answers. But one day, when the opportunity appeared, I would let the numbers speak. I poured myself a glass of wine, the cheap kind he used to mock, and looked at the photo on the mantel. It was our wedding picture. My hair was darker, my smile unguarded. His arm rested possessively around my waist, the same arm that would later hold someone else. "You said you couldn't live with a woman who earned less." I whispered to the photograph. "Let's see how you live when you pay rent to one." The thing about betrayal is that it's rarely a single moment. It's a slow erosion like water carving stone. The affair didn't surprise me. What surprised me was how easily he convinced himself it was justified. "You stopped caring about how you look," he told me once, his tone almost apologetic. "Lily makes me feel young again." I didn't argue. Numbers don't argue. They reveal. A few weeks after he moved out, the first rent check from the Silver Line building arrived in my account. It was small but steady. The property had been part of an investment portfolio I'd managed for years quietly under a holding company. He'd never asked about it, never cared to know where the extra deposits came from. He assumed it was a pension. It wasn't. It was ownership. That same month, he sold our family house, took his share, and vanished. Everyone thought I'd been left with nothing. They were wrong. I had something far more valuable than sympathy. I had structure. When my neighbor Mrs. Green brought me cookies and whispered, "He'll regret this, dear," I smiled politely. Inside, I wasn't thinking about regret. I was thinking about capitalization rates and equity returns. Still, I can't pretend the nights weren't lonely. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 a.m, the bed cold, the clock ticking too loudly, and wonder if I'd wasted my best years keeping a man comfortable. Then I'd remember how he used to leave his coffee cups half full, his shoes in the hallway, and his arrogance in every corner of the house. The emptiness began to feel like peace. You might think this is a story about heartbreak, but it isn't. It's about accounting. Every lie, every insult, every moment he diminished me, it all went into the ledger. Not out of bitterness, but precision. I started walking again, just small loops around the block, nodding at the young couples holding hands, thinking how easily time humbles everyone. I didn't plan what came next. Life presented it to me like a perfectly balanced equation. 3 years later, when the property management firm called to inform me that 2 new tenants had applied for an apartment on the 8th floor of Mr. and Mrs. Foster, I thought it was a mistake. Then I saw the signatures. His handwriting hadn't changed. The same slanted A, the same careless flourish on the F. He'd moved into one of my units with his new wife. I told the manager not to mention my name. I wanted to see how long it would take before he noticed whose building he was living in. It wasn't spite, it was curiosity. And this morning, when I finally decided the time had come to raise the rent, I remembered his words. "You don't understand the world anymore." Maybe he was right. Maybe I understand it too well. So tell me, what would you have done? Would you have knocked on his door, demanded an apology, screamed that justice had finally arrived, or would you have done what I did? Sit quietly pen in hand and let the math correct the imbalance. If you've ever been underestimated because of your age, if someone ever told you your worth, some had expired, comment 1. If you believe that silence is sometimes the sharpest revenge hit like right now. Because this isn't just a story about a woman left behind. It's about what happens when the woman they dismissed turns out to own the ground beneath their feet. And this, my dear listener, is only the beginning. The first crack appeared on an ordinary Thursday, the kind of day that should have been invisible in memory. Gray sky, burnt toast, the hum of the dishwasher. Alan came home late, smelling faintly of perfume that wasn't mine. Not floral, not powdery like my old Chanel, this one was sharp, youthful, expensive. The kind worn by women who still think the world is watching them. I noticed, but I said nothing. Silence at that moment felt safer than accusation. He tossed his briefcase on the counter, his tie hanging loose like a flag after a storm. "I'm exhausted," he said, avoiding my eyes. "Long day, client dinner." I nodded, poured him a glass of water, and asked nothing else. After 40 years of marriage, you learn the rhythm of lies. They come soft, first gentle excuses that roll off the tongue so smoothly even the liar believes them. When he went to shower, I picked up his jacket from the chair and felt something heavy in the pocket. A receipt. I flattened it on the counter. The name at the top glared at me. Le Jardin Rouge. I knew that restaurant, dim lighting, a waiting list 6 weeks long. The kind of place we'd gone to once back when anniversaries meant something. The date on the receipt was our wedding anniversary. I read the total, twice the fine print, describing a bottle of Bordeaux that cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. 2 entrees, 2 desserts, 2 people. I held the paper between my fingers, the edges trembling. I wasn't angry, not yet. Anger is too easy, too human. What I felt was closer to disbelief, the kind that settles in your stomach and stays there growing roots. He came back from the shower, hair damp, humming something cheerful. "You're quiet tonight," he said, slipping on his robe. "I was just thinking about our anniversary," I replied. He froze for a half a second so fast that if I hadn't spent decades reading every twitch in his face, I would have missed it. Then he smiled, that politician's smile of his, all charm and no sincerity. I was swamped. "We'll celebrate this weekend." I nodded again and handed him the glass of water. My hand was steady. His wasn't. That night, as he slept, I lay awake watching the shadows crawl across the ceiling. The receipt lay folded in my bedside drawer, a quiet piece of evidence waiting for context. Numbers don't lie. They just need witnesses. The next day, I noticed smaller things. His phone, once left casually on the counter, now stayed face down. He started spending longer hours at the office claiming strategy meetings. He ironed his shirts more carefully, trimmed his beard, more often wore cologne I hadn't seen before. When I asked about it, he said, "Just trying to stay sharp." You know how the corporate world is. Yes, I knew. I'd spent half my life cleaning up the corporate messes men like him left behind. One night, while he showered, his phone buzzed with a message. I didn't touch it, but I glanced at the screen. A preview glowed briefly before disappearing. "Thank you for tonight. You make everything feel new." I stared at the words until the light faded. I remember the sound of the water running, the faint hum of his off-key whistling. That was the moment something inside me detached. Not broke, not yet, just detached. I stopped waiting for him at dinner. I started eating alone at the small table near the window, watching the city lights flicker like tired fireflies. I learned the art of stillness, of letting his absence fill the room instead of fighting it. A week later, I found the second receipt, another client dinner, same restaurant. This time I didn't hide it. I laid it neatly beside his morning coffee. He noticed it immediately, his jaw tightening before he even spoke. "What's this?" he asked, though he already knew. "You tell me." He exhaled through his nose the way he did when he was about to deliver one of his practice speeches. "You're being paranoid, Ellie. It was business. You don't understand how these things work." That sentence, the one every man who's losing his lie resorts to. "You don't understand." "I understand numbers," I said quietly. 2 dinners at the same restaurant on nights that weren't business nights. 2 identical bottles of Bordeaux. I understand patterns. He pushed back his chair. "This is ridiculous. You've been alone too long, sitting here with your spreadsheets turning into a conspiracy theorist." He left for work without finishing his coffee. I watched from the window as he pulled out of the driveway, the taillights cutting through the fog like an accusation. All day I tried to work balancing accounts for a small law firm, but my eyes kept drifting to the framed photo on my desk. Our wedding day. He looked young, proud. I looked certain. That certainty was gone now, replaced by something colder and sharper. That evening, when he came home, I was sitting in the living room with a folder open on my lap. "Alan," I said, "I need to ask you something simple. Are you seeing someone?" He hesitated just long enough for the truth to escape through the silence. Then he shrugged. "I think we've grown apart. You've changed. You don't even try anymore." "Try what?" "To make me feel alive." I remember laughing, not out of humor, but disbelief. "You're 65, Alan. You want fireworks, go stand near a power line." The sarcasm stung him, I could see it, but he recovered quickly, smoothing his tie. "I'm not doing this now." He grabbed his keys and left again. When the door shut, the house felt too large. Every creak of the floorboards echoed back, memories, our first fight, our first reconciliation birthdays, quiet nights. I poured myself another glass of wine and stared at the wall until the clock struck midnight. That was when I saw the email. It came through the shared inbox for our old tax documents, a confirmation from a travel site. 2 tickets to Florence, 2 passengers, Alan Foster and Lily Bennett. Departure the day after our anniversary. The receipt hadn't been a fluke. It had been the beginning. I printed the email and placed it beside the receipts, forming a neat stack. A part of me wanted to confront him right away, to throw the evidence on the table and watch his face crack open. But another part, the quieter, older part, whispered something else. "Wait, watch. Collect everything." When you've spent a lifetime balancing books, you don't close the ledger until all the entries are in. For the next few weeks, I lived in a strange state of dual awareness. On the surface, I was the same wife, preparing his breakfast, folding his shirts, asking polite questions about his day. Beneath it, I was an auditor, documenting every inconsistency. He thought he was getting away with something. I was simply recording it. He started leaving on business trips more often. I pretended to believe him. Each time I'd quietly open his desk drawer and photograph the receipts he left behind. Hotel bookings, jewelry stores, a florist invoice for lilies, of course lilies. By the time he finally confessed, it wasn't even a confession. It was an announcement. "I'm leaving Ellie," he said one morning, standing in the doorway with his suitcase already packed. "I can't live with someone who's content being small. You've stopped growing." I stared at him, at the man who once told me my calmness was his anchor. "And you," I said, "can't live without someone to admire you. I just stopped auditioning." He looked uncomfortable, like a boy caught stealing. "You'll be fine," he said. "You always land on your feet." He wasn't wrong. He closed the door, and I stood there listening to the echo of his departure fade down the hall. Then I turned off the lights and walked to my office. I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Ledger Personal Accounts. Inside, I placed scanned copies of every receipt, every email, every record of his betrayal. It wasn't rage that guided me that night, it was precision. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It was only the first entry in a much larger balance sheet that one day would be paid in full. It had been 2 months since Alan left. The silence he once blamed on me now filled every corner of the house. I learned to live with it like a tenant who doesn't mind the echo. I woke up early, made coffee for one, and checked the market updates the way some people check the weather. Routine steadies the heart. It also hides what the heart is preparing for. The first real confirmation that something larger was happening came from Mary. She'd been my friend since we were both young analysts, sharp, quick-witted, and allergic to arrogance. Now she managed a local bank branch, the same one where Alan and I had held our joint account for decades. We met for lunch one afternoon, something we hadn't done in years. The restaurant was quiet, filled with the hum of conversation and the faint clink of silverware. Mary reached across the table, her voice low. "Ellie, I'm not supposed to say this, but something's been bothering me." I looked up from my soup, calm but alert. "Go on." "You know I can't share client details." She began carefully, "But I thought you should know Alan's been moving funds. A lot of them. And the way he's doing it, opening temporary holding accounts, transferring between shells, it doesn't look like business." My spoon paused midair. "How long?" "Since before he left," she said. "He withdrew nearly half of your joint balance and created a personal account under his name only. And get this, he used your digital signature for at least one transfer." I stared at her, the noise of the restaurant fading to a dull hum. "He forged my authorization." Mary nodded grimly. I checked twice to be sure. "It's sloppy, but it would hold up if you didn't contest it." "Ellie, he's covering his tracks." For a moment I felt the familiar wave of disbelief, the same one that had washed over me the night I found that first receipt. Then just as quickly it evaporated, replaced by something cleaner, sharper clarity. "Can you get me copies?" I asked. Mary hesitated. "Technically, I shouldn't." "Technically," I said quietly, "you're protecting a client from financial fraud." She met my gaze and exhaled. "Give me a week." That night, I sat at my desk surrounded by old tax folders scanning through years of records. I'd signed every return, every statement, every form that kept our life legally intact. Alan had never once read them. He'd always said, "You're better with numbers, Ellie. I trust you." What he meant was, "I'm too proud to look stupid." I found the last return we'd filed together and studied the bottom line. It wasn't just betrayal, it was theft. Subtle, deliberate, almost elegant in how it disguised itself within routine. I could almost admire the precision if it hadn't been so predictable. A week later, Mary slipped an envelope into my purse as we hugged goodbye after another lunch. "Be careful with this," she whispered. Inside were copies of wire confirmations, bank statements, and one handwritten withdrawal slip. The signature, my name tilted wrong. The loops too wide, the confidence too forced. I'd spent 40 years writing that name. I knew its rhythm. This wasn't mine. That night, I laid the documents across the dining table under the warm light of the chandelier. One by one, I connected the transfers. Each arrow pointed to a new account, smaller than the last, until they ended at a single destination. A private checking account opened under A. Foster. The address listed wasn't ours. It was a high-rise downtown, one of the new luxury developments, with glass balconies and concierge service. I didn't need a street view to know who lived there. He hadn't just left. He'd built a life funded by me. I laughed then, not bitterly, but with the weary amusement of someone who finally sees the whole picture. "So that's what you meant by moving forward, Alan," I murmured to the empty room. I didn't cry. Crying felt wasteful. Instead, I made tea the same way I always did, one bag, no sugar, and opened my accounting software. I began cataloging the evidence line by line. I created a new spreadsheet labeled discrepancies. Each entry had a date amount account number and note, forged unauthorized, misused funds. The list grew longer than I expected. By midnight, my screen glowed with more than numbers. It glowed with truth. But truth, I've learned, isn't always enough. You have to give it shape, weight, form. Evidence means nothing until it's prepared like a case file. So I built one. I printed everything, bound it neatly, and labeled it A, Foster Unauthorized Transactions. It looked professional cold. I liked that. 2 days later, Mary called again. "He's been in twice this week," she said. "Transferred more funds. He seems nervous." "You want me to freeze the accounts?" "No," I said. "Let him dig deeper. Holes reveal themselves better when they're deep." I hung up and felt something shift inside me. Not joy, not anger, just control. The kind I hadn't felt in years. Weeks passed. Alan's calls dwindled to none. I heard from mutual acquaintances that he was thriving, that his new wife had started a boutique design business. I smiled every time someone mentioned it. Boutique design, what a perfect phrase for something that would collapse the moment a real bill arrived. Then one morning, I received a call from my attorney. He'd been handling minor estate paperwork for me for years, Eleanor. He said, his voice hesitant. "I just got an inquiry from a firm representing your husband. They're requesting a copy of your retirement fund documentation." Why, I asked. Because he said it appears Alan is trying to claim joint ownership of your private investments. He's arguing marital contribution. I closed my eyes, the irony almost laughable. "Tell them to proceed," I said, "and keep every correspondence. I'll handle the rest." That afternoon, I walked downtown. The streets shimmered with the glare of late summer sunlight. I passed the luxury building listed on the withdrawal slip. A doorman in a navy blazer stood by the entrance, smiling politely. I walked inside, pretending to be lost, and glanced at the tenant directory. There it was, Alan Foster, Unit 8C. I didn't linger. I didn't need to. The truth was enough. But as I stepped back into the sunlight, I made a quiet vow. If he wanted to take what he thought was his, I'd let him try, and when he reached for it, he'd find nothing but air. That evening, I called Mary again. "Can you help me set up a holding company?" She hesitated. "Of course, but why?" "I want to consolidate my assets under a single entity. Clean records, transparent ownership." "You're planning something." "Not planning," I said, "preparing." In less than 2 weeks, the paperwork was complete. Silver Line Holdings, LLC. A quiet, unassuming name, just like me. It would own the investments, the properties, even the modest rental complex I'd purchased years earlier. Everything transferred smoothly. Alan's forged signature meant nothing now. His reach once wide was reduced to nothing more than rumors and bravado. And through it all, I said nothing. To friends, I was polite. To neighbors, I was kind. To myself, I was patient. Because patience, I'd learned, is the interest you earn on quiet revenge. When the final confirmation email arrived, transfer completed, ownership updated, I printed it and placed it on my desk. The date at the top glowed like a milestone, exactly 1 year since the first receipt from Le Jardin Rouge, 1 year since the betrayal began. The math had come full circle. I poured a glass of wine and raised it to the empty chair across from me. "To you, Alan," I said softly, "may your next investment not be me." After the legal transfers were done, the quiet grew heavier. The house was too neat, the air too still, and the echo of Alan's absence followed me like a shadow that refused to fade. People assumed silence meant weakness, but I knew better. Silence was where I rebuilt. Still, it didn't stop the world outside from whispering. It started small neighbors slowing their walks past my porch, pretending to water plants as they peeked toward my windows. The same people who once waved kindly now avoided eye contact. The story had already traveled. Alan left Eleanor for someone half her age. Poor thing, she must be heartbroken. They said it with pity, but underneath, the pity was judgment. The cruel kind reserved for women who grow old while men reinvent themselves. At the grocery store, I heard it more directly. "It's always sad when the wife lets herself go," one woman murmured behind me in line, not realizing I could hear. "Men like Alan need excitement." I didn't turn around. I simply paid for my groceries, smiled at the cashier, and left without saying a word. Let them think I was fragile. It's easier to build an empire when no one's watching. Mary was the only one who saw through the calm. She visited one afternoon, carrying her usual energy like a spark in the room. "You're scaring me, Ellie," she said, sitting across from me at the kitchen table. "You act like this doesn't bother you." I looked at her stirring sugar into my tea. What would it change if I acted differently? Maybe it would remind people you're human. I smiled faintly. People only see what confirms their story. If I cry, I'm weak. If I stay composed, I'm cold. Either way, I lose. She sighed. "He's moved into that apartment, you know, the one downtown." I know. With her? I know that too. Mary's eyes softened. You don't deserve this. Deserving has nothing to do with it, I said. Some debts collect themselves. I just keep the ledger. She didn't understand it yet, but she would. That night, the loneliness pressed harder. I walked through the house, our old bedroom, the hallway lined with photographs, the living room where we'd once danced after dinner. Every object seemed to hum with a faint memory, and every memory hurt. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence stretch until I couldn't tell if the ache in my chest was grief or rage. Maybe both. I thought about the years I'd spent building his comfort, managing the bills, filing his taxes, smoothing his mistakes at work when he brought them home for me to look over. I had kept his life balanced while mine disappeared into the background. And now, after all those years, I was the ghost in my own house. It was around that time that Alan's sister Margaret decided to check in. She arrived unannounced, perfume too strong, smile too polished. Ellie, dear, I just wanted to see how you're holding up. I knew what she wanted, gossip. She perched on the sofa like a guest on a talk show. Alan's worried about you, she began. He says you've been withdrawn. Alan's very perceptive, I said dryly. She ignored the tone. He's just in a different phase of life now. You have to understand, men go through things when they get older. They need to feel appreciated by someone 30, by someone who reminds them they still matter. I set down my cup carefully. Interesting. I spent 40 years reminding him. Apparently, I was too consistent. She shifted uncomfortably. Look, he doesn't mean to hurt you, but you know people move on. Yes, I said, they do. Some move forward, some move down. She frowned. Ellie, don't be bitter. It's not healthy. Bitterness is emotional, I replied evenly. I'm just documenting. Her confusion was almost satisfying. When she finally left, she said the thing she probably couldn't resist saying. I hope you find peace. I already have, I said, closing the door behind her. But that wasn't true yet. Not entirely. Because that night, when the house was quiet again, I allowed myself to unravel just a little. I poured a glass of wine, turned off the lights, and stared at the faint glow of the city through the window. Somewhere out there, Alan was laughing in a new apartment, maybe toasting to his new life. I could picture it. His loud voice, his rehearsed charm, her bright laughter like glass about to break. The image burned, but not the way it once did. It didn't hollow me out, it hardened something inside me. A week later, the whispers turned into headlines, small ones in local newsletters. Retired businessman Alan Foster and designer Lily Bennett launch interior firm downtown. The accompanying photo showed them standing side by side, her hand on his chest, both smiling too wide. I read it twice, then folded the page neatly and slipped it into a folder labeled reference material. People called me after that, old friends, former colleagues, even distant relatives, each conversation wrapped in false sympathy. You've seen the news, haven't you? She's so young. He looks happy. I thanked them politely, hung up, and added their names to a list in my notebook, observers. Not enemies, not allies, just witnesses who would one day remember the story differently. The next blow came from my own family. My niece Clara, barely 30, came over one evening, her voice cautious but earnest. Aunt Ellie, maybe you should talk to him. Closure is important. Closure, I repeated. That's what young people call forgetting, isn't it? She frowned. I just don't want you to waste your energy being angry. I'm not angry, I said, my tone calm but absolute. I'm auditing. She looked at me with the same pity everyone else did. You used to be so kind. I still am, I said, just not to people who steal from me. When she left, I realized something that both frightened and liberated me. I was alone. Truly, absolutely alone. No husband, no reputation left to protect, no audience expecting me to smile through humiliation. For the first time in my life, I belonged only to myself. And that kind of freedom is terrifying at first. Then it becomes power. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The city outside was pale and quiet, the sky the color of ash. I made coffee and sat at my desk, flipping open the file marked Silver Line Holdings. Every document was in order, ownership papers, transfers, investment logs. I stared at the company name and whispered it under my breath like a prayer. Silver Line, a line of separation, a line between the life I'd lived for him and the one I was building for me. The loneliness didn't vanish overnight, but it began to change shape. It became purpose. I stopped waiting for calls, stopped checking the mail for apologies that would never come. Instead, I started mapping possibilities, where to invest, how to expand, how to grow quietly beneath the radar. Alan thought he'd taken everything. He hadn't realized he'd only freed the part of me that no longer needed permission. By the time autumn came, the neighborhood gossip had moved on to newer scandals. I still heard the occasional whisper, "Poor Eleanor, still alone," but it no longer stung. Because somewhere out there, the man who'd left me for youth and novelty was living on borrowed luxury. And I knew, with the patience of a bookkeeper waiting for a debt to mature, that one day the balance would come due. That day was closer than anyone expected. It happened on a cold evening in late November when the city lights bled gold through the fog, and everything outside the window looked blurred, unreal. I had just finished reviewing quarterly statements for one of my investments when the phone rang. It was Mary, and I could hear the hesitation in her breath before she spoke. "Ellie, I wasn't sure whether to tell you this, but you should know. Alan's company is in trouble." The words landed with no drama, no satisfaction, just a quiet confirmation of something I had already sensed. "What kind of trouble?" "He co-signed loans for Lily's design firm," Mary said. "It's failing. The bank denied another extension today. They're behind on payments, and if they default, his name is on every document." I didn't speak. The silence stretched until she added softly, "He came into the branch last week. He looked different, thinner, nervous. He asked about liquidating his savings." I set my pen down and leaned back in my chair. The sound of the grandfather clock filled the pause. "Thank you for telling me." "Ellie," she said carefully, "this could get messy. Don't get pulled into it." I smiled, though she couldn't see it. "Don't worry, Mary, I'm not the one sinking." When I hung up, the quiet returned thick and almost holy. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel everything: the humiliation, the years of invisibility, the quiet fury that had lived beneath my ribs like a heartbeat. And then I let it pass through me, leaving something cleaner in its wake. I walked through the house, turning off the lights one by one until only the desk lamp remained. The papers on my desk looked orderly, untouched by emotion. That's what power looks like. It's not loud, it's organized. For the next few days, the past and present began to blur. I'd wake up at dawn, make coffee, and sit at the same desk where I had once balanced Alan's accounts. I thought about the woman I had been, the dutiful wife who stayed quiet to keep peace, who shrank herself to fit his ego. I hated her, but I pitied her too. She had loved honestly, and that was her only mistake. A week later, the confirmation came in the form of gossip, as it always does. At the local bookstore, two women whispered near the counter, oblivious to the fact that I was standing behind them. "Did you hear Alan Foster's new wife's store went under? They say she mismanaged everything. And she spent a fortune decorating that new apartment. Poor man, he must be mortified." I almost laughed. Mortified. No, Alan didn't feel shame. He felt inconvenience. Shame requires self-awareness. I walked home slowly through the cold, my gloved hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee. Each breath came out in small clouds that vanished before I could see them fade. That's what I wanted now, for every trace of pain to evaporate the same way. That night, I pulled out the folder labeled discrepancies and spread it across the table. The receipts, the transfers, the forged signature. They weren't just evidence anymore. They were chapters of a story nearing its conclusion. I wasn't sure yet how it would end, but I knew who would write the final line. Around midnight, I found myself staring at the stack of property reports from Silver Line Holdings. The rental complex had been performing better than projected. The company managing it had recently listed new units for sale, prime downtown real estate, the kind that appreciates fast. I scanned the list idly until my eyes caught on a familiar address, a luxury high-rise, the same one Alan lived in. At first, I thought it was coincidence. Then I checked the ownership documents and realized the developer had gone bankrupt 6 months earlier, and the property was now being auctioned in parcels to private investors, unit by unit, floor by floor. Something inside me clicked into place. The next morning, I called my attorney. I want to acquire multiple units in a downtown high-rise, I said, keeping my tone professional, preferably through Silver Line Holdings, quietly. He asked the usual questions, valuation, projected ROI, but he didn't ask the one that mattered most. Why that building? Because lawyers like accountants understand that motive isn't always relevant when the math is sound. Within a week, the purchase was complete. The documents arrived in a sleek envelope stamped with the state seal. I flipped through them, slowly tracing the embossed letters with my finger, Unit 8C, Unit 8D, and through a subsidiary clause, partial ownership of the building's management shares, enough to control the terms of lease renewals. It wasn't triumph I felt when I signed. It was balance again, that perfect, steady balance that comes when the numbers finally tell the truth. I didn't plan to confront him. Not yet. I wanted time to pass for the illusion to settle deeper into his bones. I wanted him to believe the world was still his, that he could still walk through life without consequence. But fate doesn't always wait for permission. 2 weeks later, while shopping for groceries, I ran into him. He looked older. His hair had thinned. His suit hung loosely on his frame, and the charm that once lit every room had dimmed into something forced. He froze when he saw me near the produce aisle. For a second, I saw the recognition flicker across his face, the brief panic of a man caught in a mirror that shows him exactly what he's become. "Ellie," he said, finally, voice strained, "you look, well." "Well enough," I replied, my tone neutral. He hesitated, then tried a smile. "You heard about Lily's business, I suppose." I might have. He exhaled as though preparing for sympathy. "It's been a rough year. We're adjusting." "I'm sure you are." I placed a bundle of apples into my basket. "You always land on your feet, remember?" His face twitched. "You don't have to be cruel." Cruel, I met his eyes evenly. "You left me with forged signatures and empty accounts, Alan. You called that survival. I call this symmetry." He didn't answer. He just nodded, picked up his basket, and walked away without looking back. That night, I sat by the window, watching the streetlights shimmer through the fog. My reflection looked unfamiliar. Older, yes, but steadier. Stronger. I realized then that the pain had lost its weight. What remained was purpose. I opened the lease documents again and stared at the name, Alan Foster Tenant, Unit 8C. The payment was due soon. His account balance wouldn't survive another increase, not with his current financial strain. It would be easy to evict him, but I wasn't ready to end the game. Not yet. I wanted him to live with the slow burn of dependency, the irony of paying rent to the woman he once dismissed as irrelevant. That night, before I went to bed, I whispered into the dark, "You wanted freedom, Alan. I hope you can afford it." When I turned off the lamp, the shadows didn't feel heavy anymore. They felt earned. Because this wasn't grief anymore. It was the quiet before retribution. And in that quiet, I understood something I never had before: the difference between loss and leverage. One takes away, the other waits until the right moment and then collects with interest. The morning the balance shifted, the sky was pale and brittle, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper than it should. I woke up before dawn, brewed coffee, and sat at my desk overlooking the quiet street, the same desk where I'd once signed tax returns with Alan's initials beside mine. Now only my name mattered. I opened my laptop and scrolled through my files. The folder, Silver Line Holdings, blinked on the screen like a heartbeat. Inside it was everything: proof of ownership, rental records, the recent acquisition contracts. For months, I'd been patient, letting him live in ignorance, paying rent like every other tenant. But that morning, I decided it was time to move. The moment didn't come from anger. It came from the clarity that arrives when you realize you hold every card. At 9:00 a.m., I called my attorney, Richard Haynes, a man who had once handled my small bookkeeping disputes. He answered on the second ring, his voice brisk and courteous. "Mrs. Foster, good morning." "Morning, Richard. I want to review some lease terms for a property under my company." "Of course. Which property?" "Silver Line Tower, Unit 8C. There was a pause, the faint sound of typing. "Yes, I see it. Tenants Alan Foster and Lily Bennett. What do you need?" I hesitated just long enough to savor the irony. "I'd like to make some adjustments to the renewal clause. Rent increase by 20% effective next cycle." "That's substantial," he said, cautious. "Any specific reason?" "I'm aligning market value," I said, my tone. Cool, professional. And I want the contract to reflect that future payments go directly through our holding company's escrow, not the old management firm. Understood. Another pause. Mrs. Foster, are you sure you want to be involved directly in this one? Absolutely. He didn't ask further. Lawyers rarely do when the paperwork is flawless. When I hung up, I felt the faint tremor of adrenaline under my skin. It wasn't triumph. It was readiness. Around noon, I drove downtown. The tower stood against the winter sky like a blade of glass, its mirrored windows catching the gray light. The lobby smelled of marble and ambition. I walked to the management office, greeted the young receptionist, and asked for the property manager. He arrived moments later, a nervous man in his 40s named Brian, who spoke in polite half-sentences. Mrs. Foster, it's a pleasure. We didn't know the owner would be visiting in person. I like to know where my investments breathe, I said. He smiled uncertainly, guiding me to his office. Everything's running smoothly. The Foster tenants on the 8th floor renewed last quarter, I believe. Lovely couple. Lovely, I repeated softly. Tell me, Brian, do they pay on time? He brightened. Oh yes, always punctual. Good, I said, glancing out the window at the city below. Let's keep it that way. I left him with a new contract packet and instructions for future correspondence. As I stepped into the elevator, my reflection shimmered against the mirrored wall, an older woman in a black coat, calm, composed, and utterly in control. For the first time in years, I liked the person staring back. That evening, I received an email confirmation lease adjustment processed. It was done. The new payment schedule would take effect in 60 days. I closed my laptop and leaned back, watching the shadows stretch across the living room. For so long, I had lived reacting to Alan, his moods, his ambitions, his betrayals. But now every action belonged to me. Still, something was missing. Justice without acknowledgement is only half complete. I didn't want him to know everything not yet, but I wanted him to feel something change, even if he couldn't name it. A week later, fate handed me the opportunity. Brian called, his voice hesitant. Mrs. Foster, we've had a maintenance issue in 8C. The tenants are requesting to speak directly with ownership. Would you prefer I handle it? No, I said. Schedule a meeting. I'll handle it myself. The next afternoon, I walked into the tower's conference room. The air smelled of new paint and desperation. Alan was already there, standing by the window, his posture tight. Lily sat beside him, dressed elegantly, but with eyes that darted around like a trapped bird. When he turned and saw me, the color drained from his face. Eleanor. I nodded, setting my leather folder on the table. Mr. Foster. Mrs. Bennett. Lily blinked, confused. I'm sorry, She's the owner, Alan said, his voice breaking slightly. You own this building. Not all of it, I said evenly. Just enough to matter. The silence that followed felt thick enough to taste. He looked at me the way a gambler looks at the deck after realizing the cards were marked from the start. This must be some kind of joke, Lily said weakly. No joke, I replied, flipping open the folder. You requested a maintenance adjustment, but before we address that, I thought you should be aware of the upcoming lease revision. Market adjustment, standard procedure. Alan stared at the papers without touching them. His fingers twitched. You planned this. I plan everything, I said simply. He swallowed hard, glancing at Lily, who looked from him to me, realization dawning in her eyes. You're raising our rent, she asked, incredulous. By 20%, I said, my tone still calm. It's important to keep things equitable. Alan's jaw tightened. You can't just... I can, I interrupted. You signed a contract. You always did love paperwork, you just never read it. The words landed between us like stones. I gathered my folder, nodded politely, and turned toward the door. Eleanor, wait, he said. I stopped. You don't have to do this. I turned slowly, meeting his eyes. You're right, I said. I don't have to. I choose to. For a moment, I saw something flicker in him. Guilt, regret, maybe even recognition. But it passed quickly, replaced by pride's familiar mask. This isn't you, he said. You used to be kind. I used to be quiet, I corrected. You mistook the two. Then I left, leaving him standing in the echo of his own words. That night, I walked home through the cold air, the city lights smudged and trembling on the wet pavement. I thought I might feel vindicated, but what I felt instead was relief. The kind that comes when you finally stop carrying something heavy. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and called Mary. He knows, I said. She laughed softly, and He looked smaller. Men usually do when they realize they're not the center of the story. I smiled into the glass. No, Mary, he looked real. For the first time in decades. After we hung up, I opened my journal, a habit I'd abandoned years ago, and wrote one line, "The storm has changed direction." In the days that followed, the pieces began to align. Alan tried to renegotiate the lease through an attorney, but every clause was airtight. Lily attempted to charm the property manager into leniency, but he deferred to company policy. There was nothing they could do except comply. And yet I didn't rush the next step. Revenge, I'd learned, works best when it's mistaken for coincidence. By spring, Silverline Holdings had grown. My quiet empire now stretched across 3 properties, each one stable, profitable, self-sustaining. I wasn't rich by billionaire standards, but I had something more valuable: freedom purchased with foresight. One evening, as I reviewed quarterly reports, I noticed a missed payment from Unit 8C. Only one. It wasn't much, but it told me everything. Alan was slipping. I didn't call. I didn't send reminders. The system would handle it automatically. Late fees, notices escalation, let the process speak in the language he once used against me: procedure, policy, consequence. For years, he lectured me about efficiency, about how emotions cloud judgment. Now he would learn what efficiency truly felt like when applied to him. That night, as I turned off the lights and walked down the hall, I felt the calm before the inevitable. Not triumph, something steadier. Control reclaimed inch by inch. The numbers were balancing again, and this time the ledger was mine alone. It happened on a Thursday morning, gray and brittle as winter glass. The kind of morning that makes the city sound far away, like it's holding its breath. I was sitting in my office going over quarterly projections when I heard the knock. 3 short raps, urgent, uneven, familiar. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it. Then I heard his voice. Eleanor. It was the first time he'd said my name in nearly 2 years. I didn't answer right away. I just looked at the door and watched the handle tremble, his knuckles white around the metal. Finally, I said, "Come in." He stepped inside. The years had not been kind. His once polished shoes were scuffed, his expensive coat creased at the elbows. The tie was gone, replaced by an open collar that tried to look casual but failed. He looked like a man who had aged too quickly, too suddenly, like someone who'd lost control of the story halfway through telling it. I didn't stand up. I just folded my hands on the desk. "You should have called for an appointment." "I tried," he said, voice tight. "You didn't answer." "I've been busy." He looked around the office the way men do when they're trying to find a way to feel taller. His eyes lingered on the awards on the wall, the framed property maps, the subtle shine of success that no one had ever gifted me. I'd built it quietly, piece by piece. "Nice place," he said finally, his tone brittle. "You've done well for yourself." "Better late than never." He exhaled sharply, pacing. "Eleanor, the rent increase. It's unreasonable. You know my situation." "Do I tilted my head. "Because the last time you spoke to me, you said you couldn't live with someone who earned less. Seems that's no longer a problem." He winced. "Don't do this." "Do what?" "Turn this into some kind of revenge. You're better than that." I almost laughed. "Am I? I was better when I stayed silent, when I balanced your accounts and smiled while you played the successful husband. I was better when I pretended not to know you were lying to me, to the bank, to yourself." He looked at me, then really looked. "I made mistakes, Eleanor, but you can't keep punishing me forever." "I'm not punishing you," I said softly. "I'm just letting the math play out." He sat down across from me, shoulders sagging. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the city beyond the window and the ticking of the clock on the wall. "I don't know what you want from me," he said finally, the fight draining from his voice. "Do you want an apology?" "No," I said. "I want accuracy." He frowned. "What does that even mean?" "It means for once in your life, I want you to understand the difference between what you think you deserve and what you've earned." He rubbed his temples. "You've changed." Everyone does when they stop carrying someone else's illusion. He looked away toward the skyline beyond the window. "Lily left," he said, after a moment, voice quiet. "I know. You know, I have eyes and a management team." His mouth twitched into something that wanted to be a smile but wasn't. "So you're still keeping tabs on me?" "I keep tabs on all my tenants." That landed harder than I expected. He leaned forward, his hands gripping the edge of my desk. "How long have you known? Since before you moved in?" He stared at me unblinking. "You let me live there. You watched me pay you rent month after month and you said nothing. I gave you what you wanted," I said. "Independence." He laughed a sharp, hollow sound. "You're enjoying this." I met his gaze. "Not really. There's no joy in seeing someone drown in water they poured themselves." He pushed back in his chair, running a hand through his thinning hair. "I'm broke, Eleanor. The firm's gone. The bank froze my accounts. I don't even have enough to cover next month's rent." "That's unfortunate." "Unfortunate," his voice cracked. "You think this is funny? You have no idea what it's like to watch everything fall apart." "Oh, I do," I said evenly. "I just handled it differently." He was silent for a long time, eyes flicking to the window again. "Do you still hate me?" he asked. "No," I said. "Hate implies effort. You're not worth that much energy." That seemed to hurt more than anything else I'd said. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that once held mine across dinner tables, that signed the documents transferring my trust into his name, that reached for youth when mine no longer interested him. Now they trembled. "I never wanted it to end like this," he murmured. "It didn't have to," I replied. "You chose the ending when you walked out the door with my signature in your pocket." He shook his head. "I was stupid." "Yes," I said, "but consistent." The silence stretched again, heavier, now filled with everything we'd never said. For the first time, I saw him not as the man who left me, but as the man who never really saw me at all. "Eleanor, please," he said, finally voice breaking. "I'm asking you, just give me some time. I'll find work. I'll make it right." "Time," I repeated. "You've had years. You use them on everything but honesty." He stood, his anger flickering back to life. "You think this makes you strong? You're just proving me right. You've become bitter, vindictive." "Careful," I said, quietly, standing now too. "You're confusing strength with bitterness again. It's the same mistake that cost you everything." He glared at me, but there was no real power left in it. "You can't erase me." "I already did," I said. "The day I signed those ownership papers." For a moment he looked like he might argue, but the fight drained from him again. He turned toward the door, shoulders slumped, every inch of him smaller than I remembered. At the threshold, he paused and said, "I hope this makes you happy." "It makes me balanced," I said. He left without another word. The moment the door closed, the room felt impossibly still. I sat back down, staring at the chair where he'd sat, the faint indentation on the leather, like an echo that would fade soon enough. I waited for the rush of satisfaction, the thrill of victory, but what came instead was quiet. Maybe because I realized something. I hadn't been waiting to destroy him. I'd been waiting to stop needing him to understand. For years, I wanted him to see me, to acknowledge what I'd built, what I'd carried. But as he walked out that door, I understood the truth. I didn't need him to see me at all. I just needed him to stop standing in the way of who I already was. I turned toward the window, watching the city move below, people rushing to work taxis, slicing through wet streets, life going on exactly as it always had. And I whispered to no one, "This is what freedom sounds like." The phone rang again, pulling me back. It was Brian, the property manager. "Mrs. Foster," he said cautiously. "Mr. Foster just stopped by the office. He seemed upset. Asked if there was any way to delay his payment notice." "Process it as usual," I said. "No exceptions." "Yes, ma'am." After I hung up, I stared at the clock on the wall, its steady rhythm matching my pulse. For years, Alan's words had dictated the tempo of my life, his schedule, his moods, his ambitions. Now the ticking belonged to me. I closed my ledger and wrote a single note in the margin, "Final reconciliation complete." Outside, the sky began to clear. Light filtered through the glass, spilling across the room in soft gold. I stood there for a long time, letting it warm my face. Then I whispered the same thing I used to tell myself every morning when he was gone. Be patient. Even storms have accountants. And in that private stillness, I finally understood that this wasn't revenge. It was restoration. The balance sheet of our lives had been reconciled line by line, and this time it was perfectly beautifully even. It was supposed to be a simple tenants meeting routine. Procedural, another quiet Monday afternoon. The kind of event where no one remembers what was said, only who brought the good pastries. But this one would be different. This was the day the truth would walk into the light and take a seat at the table. I hadn't planned it that way, not exactly. The agenda had been set weeks before maintenance concerns, utility adjustments, a few overdue accounts to address. But when I saw the name Alan Foster Unit 8C under Unresolved Financial Matters, I knew the universe had impeccable timing. The conference room was already half full when I arrived. Residents murmured over coffee, the low hum of ordinary lives intersecting. I took my usual seat at the head of the table. Papers neatly arranged the company name Silver Line Holdings, LLC, embossed in silver across the top of every folder. My name wasn't printed anywhere. It didn't need to be. Brian, the property manager, stood to begin. Thank you all for attending. We'll start with some brief financial updates. As many of you know, ownership of Silver Line Tower transitioned under new management last year. Miss Foster oversees the investment division. A few heads turned toward me. Polite smiles, curious glances. I nodded slightly, keeping my expression neutral. Across the room, I saw him. Alan. He was seated in the back, half hidden behind a young couple whispering to each other. He looked uncomfortable, out of place, like a man who'd stumbled into the wrong meeting and realized too late there was no exit. Brian continued flipping through the reports. We do have one pressing issue. There's an outstanding balance on Unit 8C, 3 months overdue. Mr. Foster, I believe that's yours. All eyes turned. Alan shifted in his chair. There's been a misunderstanding, he said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. We had an arrangement to defer payments. Brian frowned. I'm not aware of any deferral agreement. It was verbal, Alan said quickly. With management. I let the silence stretch, watching him twist. Then I spoke my voice even. No such arrangement exists. His head jerked toward me. You. Yes, I said. He rose halfway from his chair, his voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. You did this. You're behind all of it. The increases, the late, notices, this entire charade. I met his gaze steadily. You mean the structure that ensures accountability? Yes, I suppose I am. The room went still. Someone coughed softly. Brian looked between us, confused. I think we should... No, Alan interrupted, pointing toward me. They should know who she is. This woman, this vindictive woman, is my ex-wife. She's been using this building to humiliate me. Murmurs rippled through the room. A few neighbors who'd once whispered about poor Eleanor Foster now stared in open fascination. I stood slowly smoothing the papers before me. If you're implying that business operations are personal, I'll clarify. Silver Line Holdings owns this building. I own Silver Line Holdings. A gasp broke from somewhere in the back. Brian's eyes widened. You own the company? Yes, I said simply. Every square foot of it, including Unit 8C. Alan's mouth opened, but no sound came out. The color drained from his face as realization set in how deep the deception had gone, how easily I had let him build his new life inside something that belonged to me all along. Lily wasn't there. She'd left months ago after the bankruptcy, after the last of their savings vanished into unpaid debts. She wouldn't have stayed for this anyway. Alan was alone, now truly alone. Ladies and gentlemen, I continued, our goal here isn't to embarrass anyone. It's to ensure compliance. Mr. Foster's account is in arrears and policy requires transparency. Someone near the door whispered, "She owns the building." Another voice replied, "She owns everything." Alan slammed his hand on the table. "You planned this from the start." "No," I said calmly. "You planned it. I just kept better records." He took a step closer, eyes wild. "You're enjoying this, watching me fall apart." I looked at him, truly looked. And for the first time, I didn't see the man I'd married or the man who'd betrayed me. I saw a stranger drowning in his own reflection. Alan, you were falling long before I let go. The room was silent except for the ticking of the clock on the wall. Every sound seemed amplified, the shuffle of papers, the creak of chairs, the faint hum of the city below. Finally, I turned to Brian. Please proceed with the next item. He hesitated, clearly unsure whether the meeting should continue, but professionalism won out. Of course. Next on the agenda, maintenance fees. As he spoke, Alan stood frozen, his anger dissolving into something smaller, sadder. He looked around the room, realizing everyone was watching, and for a moment I saw the flicker of shame cross his face. Then he left, slamming the door behind him so hard that the blinds rattled. No one said anything for a while. Eventually, Brian cleared his throat. Well, that was unexpected. I smiled faintly. Life often is. The meeting went on, though no one was really listening anymore. When it ended, people lingered near the door, stealing glances at me. A few even smiled cautiously, respectfully. By the time I gathered my things, the whispers had changed tone. They weren't pitying anymore. They were admiring. Outside, the air smelled of rain. I walked to the street corner, the wind tugging at my coat, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel invisible. That evening, as I rode the elevator up to my penthouse, I found an envelope wedged under the door. No name, no address, just my initials written in his handwriting. I opened it slowly. Inside was a single page, a letter. Eleanor, I don't expect forgiveness. Maybe I never did. You were right, I didn't read the fine print in anything, not in business, not in us. I thought control was power. You proved me wrong. I hope one day you find peace, even if it's without me. Alan. I read it twice, then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer of my desk. No anger, no tears, just closure, tidy and complete. Later that week, news spread quickly through the neighborhood. Someone leaked the story how the ex-wife of a fallen businessman had quietly acquired the building he lived in. Reporters called it the most poetic real estate twist in the city's history. Headlines bloomed across local feeds. She owned the roof over his head. A lesson in financial karma. From abandoned to empowered, the woman who bought her ex-husband's apartment. I didn't give interviews. I didn't need to. The story spoke for itself. But what no one knew, what I never said, was that revenge wasn't the goal. The real victory was reclaiming my dignity from the ruins he left behind. For years, Alan had been the architect of my silence. Now I was the architect of my freedom. 2 weeks after the meeting, the final payment notice for Unit 8C expired. Legal process followed automatically a termination notice, formal and polite. I signed it without hesitation. My pen didn't shake. The document slid into the outbox like any other transaction. That night, I stood on the balcony of my apartment, the city glittering below. From here, I could see the glow of Silver Line Tower in the distance, its mirrored facade reflecting the skyline. Somewhere inside, movers were packing the last of Alan's things. I wondered if he realized that the elevator he rode, the walls he leaned against, even the keys he turned. All of it had my name quietly printed beneath his fingertips. I lifted a glass of wine, the same cheap brand he once mocked, and whispered into the wind to accuracy. A soft laugh escaped me, not bitter, not cruel, just honest, because the truth was simple. He had built his identity on illusion. I had built mine on structure, and when the illusions collapsed, only the structure remained. The next morning, Brian called. "It's done," he said. "Unit 8C is vacated. The new tenants move in next week." "Good," I said. "Make sure they get a fair lease." "Of course, Miss Foster." He hesitated. "You know the staff's been talking. They think what you did was inspiring." Inspiring. Yes, that a woman could rise like that, take back her story. I smiled faintly. "It's not about taking back," I said. "It's about writing it properly." When I hung up, the office was quiet again. I opened my ledger one last time and turned to the final page. In neat handwriting, I wrote, "Account closed, balance restored." Then I closed the book. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent, unbothered, alive. But somewhere in a rented apartment, with empty walls, I imagined Alan reading the eviction letter, realizing that everything he'd once owned, everything he'd once mocked, had belonged to me all along. And maybe for the first time, he'd understand the lesson he'd taught me by accident, that dignity once reclaimed can own the world. After the eviction notice went through, I thought silence would return, that the world would fold back into its usual rhythm, my mornings with coffee, the hum of the city below the calm anonymity I'd learned to love. But peace, I realized, has a peculiar sense of irony. When you stop chasing attention, it finds you. The story spread faster than I could contain it. It began as a whisper between residents of Silver Line Tower, passed from one curious neighbor to another like a shared secret, did you hear? The owner used to be his wife. Then came the local news blogs, small gossipy sites that thrived on poetic irony. By the end of the week, my face was everywhere. Not the face of a vengeful ex-wife as I feared, but something else entirely. They called me the Silver Queen. The title made me laugh. It sounded like a fairy tale character conjured by a journalist, desperate for a headline. But people loved it. Woman in her 70s reclaims her life by owning the building her ex-husband rents from. Proof that dignity ages better than arrogance. At first I ignored it. I didn't give interviews, didn't answer emails, didn't respond to the journalists waiting outside the lobby. I'd spent too much of my life explaining myself to people who'd already decided what to believe, but the attention had a gravity of its own. It pulled others into orbit. Mary called first. "Ellie," she said, half laughing, half breathless, "you're famous. I just saw your name on the morning talk show." "Oh dear," I said dryly. "Did I at least look respectable?" "They didn't have your picture, thank God. But they called it poetic justice. They said you gave every woman over 50 hope." Hope for what? For the idea that it's never too late to own something, especially your story. That part made me pause. I hadn't thought of it that way. The next day, the tenants began leaving small notes at my office. Handwritten letters slid under the door, some from people I barely knew. "My husband left me after 40 years. I thought I was finished. Then I read about you. You made me believe I could still start over. I don't know you, but I want to say thank you." I read them all one by one and felt something warm settle in my chest, something I hadn't felt since before the betrayal connection. But the fire of attention burns in all directions. Not everyone saw me as a symbol. Some called it vindictive, even cruel. A columnist wrote, "Revenge disguised as empowerment is still revenge." I didn't argue. Let them think what they wanted. Numbers don't care about opinion. They only balance when the truth is properly recorded. And yet I wasn't immune to the whispers. One afternoon as I entered the coffee shop near the tower, 2 women fell silent mid-conversation. When I ordered, the barista hesitated before asking, "Are you really her, the Silver Queen?" "I'm Eleanor," I said simply. "That's enough." She smiled shyly and handed me the coffee for free. "For what it's worth, my mom says you're her hero." As the days passed, the story evolved from gossip to message. The media's tone softened. Articles stopped focusing on the revenge and started discussing what it meant to rebuild a life after 50, after 70, to reclaim worth in a world that forgets women the moment they gray. I didn't need their validation, but I couldn't deny the quiet satisfaction of seeing the narrative shift. They weren't talking about Alan anymore. They were talking about us, about women like me who had been sidelined, underestimated, discarded, and yet refused to disappear. The fire spread internationally. My attorney Richard called one morning, his voice full of disbelief. "Eleanor, someone just offered to option your story for a documentary." "Tell them I'm busy," I said, half smiling. "With what?" "Living." Still not all the attention was distant. It came home in unexpected ways. One evening, as I returned from a board meeting, I found an elderly woman waiting outside the building. She stood beneath the lamplight, her coat buttoned up to her neck, a paper bag in hand. "Miss Foster?" she asked, voice trembling. "Yes." She smiled timidly. "My name's Caroline. I live 3 floors down. I just wanted to thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me that it's not too late." She opened the bag and handed me a small loaf of bread, still warm. "I started baking again last month. I used to love it, but after my husband died, I stopped. Then I read your story, and I thought if she can start over at 70, maybe I can too." I took the bread gently, the warmth seeping through the paper into my palms. "You didn't need to bring me anything." She smiled. I wanted to. After she left, I stood in the lobby for a long time, staring at the bag in my hands. That's when I understood my story had stopped being about him long ago. It wasn't revenge that spread through those headlines. It was recognition. The recognition that life doesn't end when love fails, that silence doesn't mean surrender, and that dignity is the kind of wealth no one can forge or steal. Of course, not everyone found peace in that truth. Alan couldn't disappear as easily as I could. The story had made him a cautionary tale. Former colleagues whispered behind his back. Old friends stopped returning his calls. He'd become a punchline in the same circles that once celebrated his success. I didn't see him again after that meeting, but sometimes I'd pass by the park near the tower and catch a glimpse of someone sitting on the bench reading the paper. For a heartbeat, I'd think it was him. And even when it wasn't, the thought didn't sting anymore. It just passed, like everything eventually does. By spring, the fire had reached full blaze. The Silver Queen Fund was born not by my intention, but by public demand. Mary helped me set up a scholarship program for women over 50 pursuing business education or starting small enterprises. Within weeks, donations poured in from strangers across the country. One note arrived with a check that simply said, "For every woman who is told she's too late." I named the fund Second Bloom, because that's what we all deserve, a second chance to flower after the frost. At the launch event, I stood behind a podium, surrounded by people who had once doubted me, and I told them the truth. I didn't buy a building to make a point, I said. I did it because numbers don't lie. When someone tells you your worth has expired, they're miscalculating. Dignity compounds with time, it earns interest in silence, and one day it pays back in full. The crowd applauded, some teary-eyed, others smiling knowingly. I saw Mary in the back, grinning like a proud sister. When the cameras turned off, I stepped outside into the soft evening air. The city hummed alive, unbothered, eternal. Somewhere in an apartment far away, maybe Alan was reading the headlines again. Maybe he laughed. Maybe he didn't. But for me, there was nothing left to prove. The numbers were closed, the ledger balanced, and the story had already moved beyond both of us. As I walked home, streetlights flickering gold across the pavement, I thought about all the women who'd written me letters. Their trembling handwriting, their small hopes wrapped in big words. And I whispered a quiet prayer for them. May they all learn to keep their own books. Because the truth is, the world will always try to write you off. But if you know your own worth, if you document it carefully line by line, like a patient accountant of the soul, no one can steal your story again. So when people ask me now if I regret any of it, I tell them this: I don't regret losing him. I regret not realizing sooner that I never needed him to begin with. The fire burned hot, yes, but from it something new grew, a generation of women stepping out from the shadows, carrying ledgers of their own, ready to balance the debts of history. And if you're listening to this, wondering whether it's too late for you, let me be clear, it isn't. Comment 1. If you believe that power has no age limit, and like this story, if you've ever had to rebuild your dignity from ashes, because trust me, rebirth looks good on everyone. It took months for the noise to fade. Reporters stopped calling. The headlines dimmed. The whispers quieted into echoes. And I finally had my silence back. The first morning, it felt real. I woke up before sunrise the way I used to when Alan still lived here. The city outside was hushed, the air cold and clear. I made coffee, stood by the window, and watched the first light break across the rooftops. The world had returned to its balance, and so had I. Silver Line Holdings kept growing. With the fund established and new partners joining, I no longer managed every detail myself. Younger women, smart, hungry, relentless, had taken the helm, many of them graduates from the Second Bloom Scholarship. Watching them work reminded me of what I'd forgotten. In all those years of living in someone else's shadow, potential doesn't expire. Every now and then, someone from my past would call. Old friends who'd once pitied me wanted to catch up. Former colleagues invited me to speak at panels about late success. I declined most of them. Success to me wasn't the story, peace was. And peace doesn't perform. I did hear about Alan from time to time. The world never stopped gossiping about him. It simply changed its tone. His new ventures failed one after another. His reputation never recovered. Last I heard, he'd moved back to a small coastal town working as a financial consultant for a local firm. Nothing scandalous, nothing tragic, just diminished. Someone asked if I'd ever forgive him. I thought about that question for a long time. Forgiveness, I realized, isn't an act you perform for others. It's the quiet decision to stop auditing a debt you've already written off. So yes, I suppose I forgave him. But not because he deserved it, because I did. One spring afternoon, I walked past the old park near the tower. The same place where we'd taken our first photo as a couple decades ago beneath a cherry tree that still bloomed every April. I stopped there, standing beneath the same pale blossoms, and felt a strange peace settle over me. I remembered the version of myself who once waited on that bench for him to come home from work. Hands folded, heart soft, believing loyalty was the same as love. I wanted to tell her she'd been right to believe, but wrong to wait. As the petals drifted to the ground, I whispered, "You can rest now." That night, I hosted dinner at my apartment, a small gathering for the women from the scholarship fund. We talked about their projects, their goals, their fears. One of them, a widow named June, said quietly, "You make it look easy, Miss Foster, starting over." "It's not easy," I told her. "It's necessary." She smiled. "And what comes after?" "Freedom," I said, "and a bit of laughter if you're lucky." We laughed then, the kind of laugh that comes from knowing you've survived something you once thought would break you. After everyone left, I cleaned up the dishes, poured myself a final glass of wine, and sat by the window. From here, I could still see Silver Line Tower glittering in the distance. It was strange to think how much that building had changed my life, or maybe how much I had changed within it. I didn't feel proud. I felt grateful for the struggle, for the silence, for every lesson disguised as loss. Because without them, I wouldn't have discovered the truth that has become my anchor. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it whispers. And mine whispered like the sound of paper sliding across a desk, steady, precise, inevitable. I thought about Alan one last time, not with hatred, not even sadness, but something softer. Compassion, perhaps, or curiosity. I wondered if he'd ever sit by his own window somewhere thinking about the moment he realized what I'd done, whether he hated me for it or finally understood why I had to. But I didn't dwell. The past is a closed account now. Before going to bed, I opened my old ledger, the one where I'd recorded every lie, every transaction, every quiet victory. I flipped to the final page, the ink faded but legible, and wrote a single sentence, "Balance achieved." Then I closed it for good. The next morning, I donated it to the archive of the Second Bloom Foundation, labeled "A Record of Lessons." Maybe one day someone will read it, a woman somewhere between endings and beginnings, and realize she isn't alone. Because that's the truth I want to leave behind, not that I owned a building or that I outwitted a man who once underestimated me. Those are footnotes. The real story is simpler. I kept the books. I kept my dignity, and in the end, both were worth more than gold. The city is alive outside my window again. I can hear laughter from the street below, the sound of possibility. I sip my coffee, close my eyes, and let the morning light fall across my face. This is what peace feels like, quiet earned final. And for the first time in my life, I am completely, perfectly free. The city has seasons of sound. In spring, it hums. In summer, it shouts. By autumn, it sighs. Winter, though, that's when it listens. That's where I find myself now, sitting by the window as snow drifts past the glass, each flake melting before it lands. The world is quieter these days, but it's not empty. It's full of echoes. Voices I once carried, lessons I once ignored, truths I finally learned to name. People often ask what happened after everything. After the headlines, the eviction, the fund, as if stories end at victory. They don't. They taper into meaning. I didn't become a symbol by choice. I was simply a woman who refused to vanish. But if people find strength in that refusal, then I'll wear it gladly. I've learned that dignity doesn't require applause. It simply requires you to hold your ground even when no one is watching, especially then. Sometimes I walk past Silver Line Tower not out of nostalgia, but as a kind of meditation. I see new faces there now, families, students, dreamers. The lobby smells of coffee and new paint. Life has replaced what was broken. I always pause before leaving, resting my hand against the marble wall. Not out of ownership, but gratitude. That building became the mirror in which I finally saw myself clearly. I think often about how easy it is to disappear in someone else's narrative. You don't notice it at first. It starts with small things, the way you defer decisions, the way you apologize for wanting more, the way you let silence fill the spaces that should have been yours. One day you wake up and realize you've been edited out of your own story. That's what I lived through, and that's what I refused to let happen again. If there's a truth worth sharing from all of this, it's not about revenge. It's about authorship, about remembering that you are the only one who can write your story to completion. And if someone tries to steal the pen, take it back. I know some people still call me the Silver Queen. It used to make me laugh. Now it makes me think. Silver isn't gold. It doesn't gleam as loudly, doesn't demand attention. But it endures. It tarnishes, yes, but when you polish it, the shine is deeper, truer, honest. Maybe that's why I like it. I don't need to glitter anymore. I just need to last. Mary says I've become too philosophical. She's wrong. I've simply learned the math of life. Every joy is an addition, every loss a subtraction, and every time you survive something you thought would end you, that's compound interest. The world keeps trying to measure women like me by what we've lost: youth, marriage, certainty. But the truth is, the longer we live, the richer we become in clarity, in patience, and resilience. Age doesn't empty us, it distills us. I once thought love was what gave me worth. Now I know it was never love's job to do that. Worth is self-sustaining, like quiet electricity. It hums even when the lights go out. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear his voice. Not cruel or bitter, just a ghostly echo from another lifetime. "You've stopped growing, Ellie," and every time I hear it, I smile, because he was right in his small way. I did stop growing. I evolved instead. Growth is what you do when you're young. Evolution is what you do when you finally know yourself. I wonder if he ever found peace. I hope so. I've learned that holding on to resentment is like keeping accounts open that will never be paid. You can't thrive when you're busy collecting debts that no longer matter. Forgiveness, I've decided, is not absolution. It's accounting. You simply balance the books and move on. The Second Bloom Foundation has blossomed beyond what I imagined. Last week, a young woman, 49, newly divorced, sent me a message after receiving her grant. She wrote, "You made me believe I'm not done yet." I read it 3 times and smiled. That's the legacy I want, not revenge, not ownership possibility. I suppose that's what I've been chasing all along, the possibility of beginning again. If you're listening to me now, if my voice has followed you into whatever quiet corner you find yourself in tonight, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me years ago. You are not too late. Not for success, not for happiness, not for redemption. The calendar doesn't decide when your story ends, you do. And when you decide to start again, don't announce it. Don't beg for permission. Just start quietly. Build something no one sees coming. Let the world underestimate you. It makes the reveal so much sweeter. I know this story has been called many things: revenge, empowerment, irony. But for me, it was something simpler, a correction. Not just of finances, but of faith. A way of proving to myself that even after betrayal, you can still trust your own hands. Tonight, as I finish this recording, the snow outside thickens. The lights blur through the flakes, soft and golden. Somewhere below, a siren wails and fades into distance. Life continues untidy, unpredictable, magnificent. I close my eyes and breathe. I can almost hear the rhythm of my heartbeat syncing with the city, balanced, even, at peace. I used to think closure was an ending. Now I understand it's the point where you stop chasing justice and realize you've already become it. So if you've been listening, wondering what to take from all this, take this. When the world counts you out, keep your own books. When someone tells you you're finished, calculate again. And when you find yourself standing alone in the silence, don't mistake it for emptiness. It's the sound of your story resetting. Because one day, you'll look around and realize everything they took from you. Every insult, every dismissal, every lie became the foundation for the life you built in their absence. And that, my dear, is balance. If you've ever been underestimated and rose anyway, comment 9. If you believe that grace is stronger than revenge, hit the like, because dignity doesn't shout at documents. And in the end, the records always tell the truth.